Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Child's Gallery and our virtual artist talk with Resa Blatman, Joan Hall, and Karen Lee Sobol as they discuss their group exhibition, Making Waves 2, on view at the gallery through March 9th, 2025. My name is Richard Baiano. I'm president of the gallery, and the exhibition is on view Tuesday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., and Saturday and Sunday, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. We are open to the public, and we hope you all can come in and see this exciting show. We are in a webinar format, and so there will be a question and answer opportunity following the artist talk. So please feel free to submit questions via the chat feature or the question and answer feature during the presentation. So a little bit about Making Waves 2. Making Waves 2 is the reimagining of our first exhibition, Making Waves, which featured 3 artists' responses to climate change through their art that addresses humankind's relationship to the ocean. The first exhibition was to open on March 13th, 2020, which was approximately 2 days before the formal COVID world shutdown. Subsequently, Making Waves was only ever glimpsed on the Child's Gallery website, YouTube videos, or through select appointments. So nearly 5 years later, we decided that we would put Making Waves 2 on again. And it reimagines the original exhibition with new artwork from Resa Blatman, Joan Hall, and Karen Lee Sobol, alongside select pieces from the 2020 show. And it advocates for greater awareness of our climate crisis in the hopes of engendering ideas for change. So with that, I'm going to walk you through a couple installation shots of the exhibition. This is our main floor here. So with that, I'm going to go to Resa Blatman and invite her to talk a little bit about her work. I'm going to put the first slide on, and Resa, I'll allow you to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then my question I would ask you is, has climate change and activist art always been a part of your work?
Thank you, Richard. Thanks, other panelists, for being here, and everyone at the Child's Gallery for hosting us. Yes, climate change has been a part of my work since 2010, although I've always been sort of a naturalist, environmentalist in my own small ways. But in 2010, my husband and I watched the documentary Gasland, and we found it so appalling and upsetting that it moved me to go from painting themes of nature and abundance to the destruction of the environment through various means. At that time, it was fracking. That Gasland is all about the fracking. What do you call it? Companies and how they are destroying the landscape and poisoning people's water and making people sick in the search for methane to produce natural gas, which we all use, many of us use to heat our homes and do our cooking. So, you know, it's a paradox, a quandary. It's upsetting, and also one feels quite small because unless you live off grid and don't take part in anything produced by the companies around the world, then you're participating in the degradation of the environment. So nevertheless, I decided to paint about it because it was one way I could take my grief and sorrow and put it into my work. So I started with paintings that are not in this show and moved on to other themes after fracking. This one in particular that you're looking at, The Breaking, is about wildfires and rising tides, rising shorelines, and how nature has to survive amid these crises. So,
So one of the things that I think is apparent in your work, and we see this, that nature really is the inspiration, and that your heroes are flora, fauna, small birds, and the marshes. And one of the things that always strikes me as well is the juxtaposition of these very beautiful images with very disturbing subject matter. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that.
well, just like we can't have darkness without light, beauty resides no matter what, even in the most grim areas of our lives, even in the darkest, most horrible aspects of life. One could read about the Holocaust and find that there were prisoners who found beauty even in those moments. So there's always beauty to be found in the environment, and even while we're destroying it, I mean, the animals are still there, the plants are still there, the trees are still there, the sky, the water. So it's still quite beautiful. And it's important to hold both in our minds and in our hands and be able to navigate through that. And yes, the animals they are stand-ins for humanity. I don't necessarily want to paint people, so I use the animals to speak for me.
Is another lovely one.
Yeah, this one is one of my favorites. I like the very first one as well. Um, the birds are perching on what in the first one it's called the breaking. These spindly tree things are from was it Bosch, or I can't remember um, whose paintings I was looking at, and from the 1500s. And there were these strange spindly trees in the paintings way in the background with these wheels on top. And it found out that they were called breaking wheels. And what they would do is if somebody committed a crime like stealing, they would, I don't know if they killed the person first. I assume they did. And then they would hoist them up into these trees with these wheels and tie them on. And then, of course, nature, birds and would attack them and eat their flesh. And so they were torture instruments. And there was something about them that spoke to me. And I didn't put the wheels in, but I allowed these spindly things to be coming up through the ocean, and the birds could have a place to land because in my imagination, the land was now covered in water and they needed a rest. So they had these little breaking objects to land on.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about your interest in the marshes and your recent experiences?
Yeah, I in last year I was awarded a Great Marsh Artist Residency Award. It's not really a residency, it was a fund, a private fund for the Great Marsh in along the coast of New England, well, Massachusetts mostly, but it does run into a little bit into New Hampshire. And if anyone wants to go and explore, it's up by Newbury in that area. And it's a stunning piece of ecology that has been around since the beginning of this land, and the Native Americans used it. And then, of course, colonists came in and started to change the marsh and the flow of the water. And it's been I don't want to say ruined, but it's been um, influenced by these folks over the years, and it's in peril now. And it's a huge ecosystem for birds that fly across the world, and they need this place to stop. And it's also it has a huge habitat for other, excuse me, wildlife, marine life, and so on. So anyway, I was awarded money to create a body of work. They chose different people. There's a composer, a musician, a poet, and so forth. And I think, one of the two painters. And this is the work that I created. These are all 18 by 24 inch paintings, and they're close-ups of the marsh. I didn't want that typical expansive view that one sees of the marsh, that in idealized views, idealized paintings. For me, it was important to get up really close to the muck of the marsh and paint it that way, and make it dramatic and also beautiful.
So Risa, I'm gonna end your discussion with one last question for you, because we started talking about COVID and you had a very close to death experience with COVID. So I'm wondering how that affected your art.
Well, I did have a show with you guys, the Cloud Show, and yeah, I mean, it was very traumatic. Whenever I have a big trauma in my life, it seems that I can't remember. I lose memories from what happened before. So you were talking about, we had a Zoom meeting about it and the show, and I remember nothing about making waves, not absolutely nothing, because I had this big trauma where I was in the hospital for 6 days, near on death's door from COVID, and it shifted my work for a little while. I think I was stuck. I didn't know what to do when you go through something like that. You're not sure. At least I didn't know what to do next, and I had a Great Depression and thought I was going to give up making art completely. And then something shifted. I got a residency at Mount Auburn Cemetery, and basically the cemetery saved my life. And I started making paintings about moss, and one thing grew into another. And here I am, still alive, still walking on this earth.
And making beautiful works too.
Thank you.
So now I'm going to introduce Joan Hall. Joan, welcome. And I'd like you to talk about your work.
Okay, so today it's more important than ever I think, to raise awareness about climate crisis through art. And being an artist and an avid sailor, for me, life is about control and surrender. And living in Jamestown, Rhode Island now, I see the effects of climate change firsthand. But when I first started working with it, I actually lived in the Midwest. So, I just always had a love of the ocean. And my work emerges as I draw in space with the cutout pieces that I made from ideas that are based, that I visualize in my mind. And color plays an incredibly important part in conceptualizing the works. My most recent piece, Riding the Wave, was a visualization of plastic detritus washing up on a beach at a particular time of day. There are incredible sunsets from Jamestown, looking out over from my studio, and sometimes they're the weirdest color of reds and oranges and pinks. And I rely on memories to inform my work. The first time I saw the ocean, I knew it was my kindred spirit. As I said, I grew up in the Midwest. Who knew? Everything about the history of maritime, everything about maritime history, navigation, and charts intrigued me. I learned how to navigate, and I sailed quite a bit of time offshore, and it's really hard to explain what it feels like to be out of sight of land. To me, I experienced the sublime for the first time because my senses were just overwhelmed by the greatness of the sea. And I knew at that point I really wanted to explore the relationship between humanity and nature. And the relationship of man to nature was an important theme in the Renaissance, exploring the insignificant of humans when compared to the natural world. And I think that's what I felt when I was out on that boat, was I felt incredibly small and insignificant. And yet I also thought about the impact we were having on the world. Over 20 years ago, I began collecting articles about the warming of the ocean and its effect on the planet. I was being treated for cancer at that time, and I thought how ironic it was that while we were acidifying the ocean, primarily from plastic pollution, we were looking to the ocean for cures. Can you change, Richard?
Yeah.
Thank you. So earlier works were a dialogue between my own existence and that of the sea. And it's an interesting biological fact that all of us have in our veins the same percentage of salt that exists in the ocean. And we really are tied to the sea. I use printed marks to create the initial patterns in collagraphs and relief plates that are made by embossing plastic detritus that I've collected from the beaches. In the Morning Light includes embossed masks from the early days of COVID because I found them everywhere washed up on the beach. It was really weird. I also found them in streams. It's like people just pulled them off and threw them. Change, please. Often my work includes references to loss both personally and globally. And Ocean Library was made by casting two different books. One was a book of Jansen, The History of Art, that I was taught from in art school, and there were no women artists in it. So I think of it as the first book on misinformation. And then the other was a book that was from my late husband, Mark Weil's library, about the history of religious art. And I thought about the fact that you must have faith. And those two things to me are very important about thinking about and talking about climate change. For this piece, I cast the paper using his cotton shirts and then coated the books with sand from around the world and detritus I gathered on beaches. I don't know if you know it, but if we no longer have coral reefs, that beautiful sand created in the tropics that we see is a byproduct of parrotfish eating off the reefs. And with no reefs, the idea in my mind is that sand could be gone. In fact, the whole idea started from the fact that I read an article about how Florida was trying to buy sand from the Bahamas because they were running out of it. Change, please. And beneath the layers and the patterns and the colors, in my work, to me, there's a troubling message. And like Resa, beauty is incredibly important to me. And my feeling is that this message is hidden within the beauty of the pieces. And if you choose to see it, you'll find it. And my sculptural works move between 2 and 3 dimensions. And these small works I think of as like small jewels and little vignettes of thoughts about, you know, both the beauty of the ocean and the plastic. Change, please. I also move between the past and the present. Bottle Cap Beach. Whoops. I guess you can change it. Okay, change again. Bottle Cap Beach was created from plates made both from plastic bottle caps I found littering the beach and the metal bottle caps that Richard Baiano collected as a child on the Jersey Shore. And I've always had an interest in moving between the past and the present, even when I was dealing with things about the ocean that were not about climate change. Change, please. I've been experimenting with combining paper and glass and metal since the 1970s. And all I can say is, don't ask me why. It's just 3 materials that I love together. And washed up is a part of a new body of work where the glass is actually the predominant material, combined with paper pulp painting and metal. Having come from a printmaking background, I find collaboration really interesting. And I work with Benny Gregier from Gather Glass in Providence, Rhode Island. And finding someone that you have an instant rapport with is not easy. And we're currently working on some more collaborations. In my practice, I'm drawn to working with materials and processes that are indirect. I thought about that. It's like paper has to dry. The print, you don't know what it looks like till you pull the paper off the plate onto the press. And with glass, it must cool down. And with each step along the way, I make adjustments based on my dialogue with my work. And my narratives come from combining sort of fractured experiences with the use of multiple materials to express my concerns about our greatest resource, which is water. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Now we're going to move on to Karen Lee Sobol. And Karen Lee, I'm going to ask you a couple questions to begin with. So I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about your career and training as an architect and how that has influenced your work, both in style and technique.
First of all, Richard, oceans of thanks to you and to our Child's Gallery team for bringing Joan and Resa and me back together again. And Resa and Joan, I always learn so much from you and appreciate your work so much. And what we have is, I feel, a really uplifting exhibit here on a very somber subject. So even before I answer your question, Richard, I just want to say that I kind of have a biological connection since I was a kid. I grew up in New Jersey like you did. The Garden State Parkway sliced through the town. The quality of the air changed, and I knew that we had a problem. But I did go on to have a career as an architect, and as architects, we draw on flat tables. And we draw with right angles. You know, things are pretty precise. I mean, in the last couple of decades, people are using curves more, but that was not so common when I was trained. So I always paint on a big flat table. And in fact, in 2020, when Making Waves was in the gallery, but we were all working at home, I set up a great big hollow corridor, started to paint, and started to watch my Nobody's Nomad series emerge. So I think that the architecture career, it carries through in that I know how to be really organized when I need to, but the painting is just much more physical and much more intuitive and much more free.
So in terms of your technique, I think some of these are actually painted in the water. Is that correct?
That's correct. So I'm an Aquarian and I'm a swimmer, and water is absolutely a crucial life force for me. It's a source of joy and it's really a source of sustenance. This painting and High Tide and the painting that follow its Low Tide were made at the beach. So if I were in the studio working on my big flat table, I would start by wetting the canvas, spraying it with tap water, and then working with layers of water thinned paint. But when I'm at the beach, I can just float the canvas in that great big available source of water, the ocean. And it's fascinating to watch not only how the canvas ripples and travels with the motion of the ocean, but also what it attracts: seaweed, sand, detritus, and then back on a table on a porch somewhere, um, the paint merges with the seawater. As the canvas dries, the seawater offers kind of a unique sparkle.
I'm going to go to the next one. And can you tell us a little bit about what the series Nobody's Nomads is?
I would love to tell you that. So back to the makeshift hollow corridor painting table during COVID. I just started painting, and at home I can't use my usual materials because I'm a very physical, very messy painter. And working at home, flinging paint everywhere just isn't a good thing to do. So at home, working with Sharpies and watercolor, and just watching what emerged, um, I saw animals, I saw fantasy creatures, and for decades and decades, I've been an educator um, on global marine issues, global marine crises. So we all are aware of how many humans around the world basically have to leave home now for climate-driven reasons. Maybe the drought is so severe that they can no longer grow their crops. Maybe the land is so flooded that they can no longer live there. maybe it's too hot, maybe it's too frozen. So the Nobody's Nomads series really has three, or really addresses three key challenges. One is international health crises. One is the escalating cascade of environmental refugees of all species. And the third is the impending challenges that the entire biosphere faces. But even so, there's always light and there's always hope. So
Here's
now oh, sorry, Richard, go ahead.
go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, now we've been at the beach. Now we've left the beach. So I invite you to dive in with me. Usually I start painting with blues, but in this case, I started with oranges. And as pools of ocean appeared and fish took shape within them, and then up in the air, I decided to include a couple of fish who are kind of confused. They're not really sure which way is up. They're not really sure which direction is safe. And as for the person faces a challenge too. And I do just want to say before we move on that, or that's fine, we'll move on. So as I've said, I kind of paint like I swim, which means it's total immersion. It's like a full body experience. And here, there are lots of people and lots of fish kind of diving in, diving under, gasping for breath, and kind of teetering, trying to figure out how to keep their balance. So I think, what's the question? The question is, why do we paint? Well, we paint to communicate. And I love learning what other people see and what other people feel when they experience the worlds that I create. And I find that the more I listen, the more I learn. So here's an example. Last year at MIT's Pfizer building, which is a biotech research building, my team and I had just finished installing this painting in a huge space. I was at the back of the space, just collecting tape and tools and getting ready to pack up. When I turned around, I saw two young women in front of this painting, facing each other, karate kicking and punching the air and just really going at it. They spotted me and they said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." But I said, no, please, engage, like have fun with this. And what they told me was they were expressing their frustration with their bosses because they felt that women should have more power and more presence in the world of science. And then I had a very different set of responses in the gallery last Saturday. One woman stood in front of this painting and saw rock and roll. She saw guitars and strings and felt music. And another saw snorkel goggles, which reminded her of all the joy that she has when she is snorkeling in the ocean. There were two young men who spent a really long time with this painting. They read the wall text, and then one of them asked me the really hard question, which is, do you still have hope? And my answer was, yes, I do. We have to have hope.
So we have a comment from William Evertson, who is an artist also interested in activist art. And he says, just a comment, since climate change became a political litmus test, it's wonderful to see this timely exhibition brought back for us. Lovely works that remind us of the fragility of our oceans and our climate. And that, let me just see, I'm going to let you finish, Karen, and because that will lead me to a question for all three of you in a moment.
So now we're well, Bill, thank you very much. That's a beautiful comment for all of us. Thank you. So now we're shifting to a much smaller scale. These paintings are just 12 by 12 inches each, and they're painted over older paintings. Cross current, offshore, and tide pool are showing us little fishes and also marine mammals that are caught and confused because they're trying to find each other, and they're also trying to find their way out to a safe place. And now let's go back to the beach. No, back to the next forward. Thank you. But back to the beach, and specifically, this is Michelle's beach. So surf is splashing onto the sandy shore, and as we look out to sea, among the fishes, there's a seal pup romping and welcoming us. And on that note, yesterday's nightly news ended on a high note with a story dancing with the dolphins. And as it turns out, yesterday, just 10 miles out offshore from Monterey Bay, there was a whale watch tour boat whose crew wasn't entertaining tourists, but was out on a research mission when they found themselves surrounded by 3,000 dolphins. And these dolphins were sailing through the sea, leaping through the air. There were mothers swimming with their babies, and there were even spotted 2 right whale dolphins, which are unusual because they lack dorsal fins. So this is such an exhilarating sight and so much encouraging news, and it really sparks what I'm aiming to do in my work, which is establish empathy, establish a connection, establish a visceral and emotional love and respect for marine life and also all life that's on the earth. So I would like to finish by saying that to me, making waves too feels like flying on the crest of a magnificent and life-affirming sea. And I'm very honored to ride this wave with all of you.
Thank you very much. That was very lovely. I do want to actually go back to Bill's comment because it ties into what I was, the first question I was going to have for all 3 of you, which is that how much more important do you all feel that your work is now that climate change denial seems to be in the air, and how do you view each of your work going forward? And before I allow you all to answer that, I want to make a connection between the 3 of you as artists that I don't think I ever made, but now it makes a lot of sense to me. Karen Lee, this is something you did not talk about, which is that you each have had near death experiences which really affected your need to make art. And it's just a comment, not a question, but I think that shows some of the care and concern in your work. So back to the question, how much more, and whoever wants to jump in first, how much more important is this kind of work now?
Well, I think it's much more important than it's ever been before, because money seems to be much more important to the powers in charge of many nations than even it used to be before. You know, back, Joan, to your points about plastic, which you know so well, I see my work shifting. There will always be fish. It's just the way that I move. That I can't see changing, but I feel the global tides are shifting, and I feel that there's a real sea change happening. We all have access to data, but data is easily forgotten. And I feel for all of us, and certainly my view is continuing to make things that have as wide an audience as possible and that connect with people as emotionally as possible and motivate all of us to try to affect change is going to be really, really crucial.
I'd like to say it's that I think it's always been important. I think that it's now we, as you know, with our current administration, they're rolling the stone backwards, which is disheartening in many respects. Although there's also things such as in where I live, they have, local areas are doing things. And like we have these, like, I don't know what you call them exactly, sieves, but they gather the plastic and the debris out of Newport, out of Narragansett Harbor. And they're also finding that things are coming back to the area, to the bay that didn't exist before. So I guess I'm something of an optimist. And I think that I have to continue making work that brings people into it by seeing beauty. And then maybe they start seeing those things that, like, bits and pieces of plastic or shapes. I work very abstractly, so it's not like, I need someone to actually see the actual object. But I mean, I grew up in Ohio where the Cuyahoga River caught on fire because of pollution. So I guess that's why I'm something of an optimist, because I've seen also the area in the Keys go from being really polluted to being less polluted. But, who knows what the future, because of where we're heading right now. And I think what you said, Karen, is really, significant.
I'm not sure how to answer this question. Because my work is less focused on climate change per se than it used to be. I'm more focused on, I started a spiritual journey in the last year. And so my focus is on compassion and presence and reaching humanity through those tools. And then hopefully reaching other aspects of our connectedness with the environment. So I'm not, I can't say I'm an environmentalist the way I was or thought of myself. Now I'm making work I hope will add beauty to the world and give people a sense of joy. And that's all I think I can do. That's as much as I think I can do. I don't think I have shown my work at colleges and universities for a long time and given talks about climate change and changing habits. And sometimes it feels very futile. People want what they want. They want their conveniences. And I find that it's very hard to convince people to make even small changes. So I don't know where that puts me, but sometimes I'm not an optimist. Sometimes I'm a pessimist. So,
But one of the things that I think is important from my perspective as a gallery is that in this time, I feel like it's more important that we keep on making the effort to say what we think we need to say and to do what we need to do. And as art is our chosen calling, art is the way in which we communicate this. So in fact, I think that for my own personal experience, I've just become more certain that the way forward, at least in this small little platform that Child's Gallery is to have a place where people can say things that are important and make beautiful work. I mean, I'm one of these old-fashioned art people that feel like beauty is inherent in art, but ugly can be beautiful too. So,
well, I have a question for you, Richard. Do you notice when you have shows like this up about specific topics that people respond? Do they talk to you in the gallery about it? Do they feel
yeah,
moved?
what the only way I can answer that is, and I think all of you were included in our post-pandemic show, is that when for lots of reasons a decision had to be made on how the gallery would move forward, I decided that if it was to go forward, it was going to go forward with more of a purpose that relates to our time, because I always feel that, as the cliche says, all art is contemporary, all art was contemporary at one point. To answer your question, in the 5 years we've been reopened, I've been at the gallery for 25 years. In the 5 years that we've been reopened, we placed more artwork in more institutions, museums, college museums, than in my entire career, even though historically Childs has many of the things that we've sold over time are now in museums, but now they are interested in what we are doing. And so I think that
Right.
that to me is enough to continue to do what we're doing.
I have a comment for Resa. And that, Resa, when I went through having cancer and you talked about having, like going through a spiritual journey, I found that the way I work changed, and that I did a lot of reading about repetition and trauma. And I was looking at your marsh paintings and I was thinking about, I mean, for me, it's cutting. It's like this, I go into this zone when I cut. And I was looking at your marsh paintings and thinking how the grasses, that there was this repetition in that. And I don't know if you've ever read anything about that, but I think you'd find it interesting if you haven't.
Thank you. I'll look at it. Thank you.
I want to read a comment from Sophia Adamia. She says, I would like to thank you all for your presentations today. Your insights and passion for the environment highlight our deep connection to each other and the planet. Your voices are vital in this fight, and your dedication to awareness and solutions is truly inspiring. Climate change is urgent, and your work drives the conversation towards action. So thank you. Also, there was a comment from Elaine Dulski, and it's for Karen Lee. And she's wondering if you are working with any local climate organizations to help them create new images to make people aware of the climate crisis.
That is a wonderful question and a great idea. And at the moment, I am not and have not been. However, I do have a long history with the New England Aquarium. And actually, this coming week at the gallery, we're going to host a group from the Harvard School of Public Health, where I also have a long history with the Center for Health and the Global Environment. They will be bringing their team to us to experience this art. That's the place where I got my really extraordinary education in 2001 on all of these climate issues that we're now seeing in the newspapers for the first time. So I guess rather than answering the question by saying, yes, I'm working immediately with these groups, I would say there's been a continuum that I'm very, very fortunate and grateful to have, of people who with whom I've been working and learning from for a couple of decades.
I want to quickly go back to some of the installation shots, because again, as I listen to the three of you talk rather eloquently, I want to make the point that all of your work really works well together. I mean, it's really quite an impressive presentation, and I do hope that people are able to come in and see it, because again, the work is both beautiful and jarring at the same time. So I'm fielding some questions on my yeah. So Resa, let me ask you this. I hope you will continue to still paint, correct?
Oh, yeah. I've got a big commission. I've got 4 of these giant paintings going on behind me. And I'm working on some public art projects. So yes, I
Well,
do love making the work. Yes.
because I do hope that what comes from all of this is hope and not hopelessness. You know,
No, I think it's unrealistic to believe that people don't vacillate. at least from my perspective. Just like we all feel sad at times, and then we feel not sad. We feel sometimes hopeless, and sometimes we feel hopeful. And I think it's just honest to recognize that. That's all.
Joan, can you talk a little bit more about the juxtaposition of handmade paper, printing, and glass? You were talking about collaboration, and as I look at your background and I think forward to the fair coming up, I'm curious if you could elaborate more on putting the three things together.
It's kind of interesting because, you know, I never was much of a fan of flat prints, but because I was doing, I would back up, I was doing ceramics and printmaking in undergraduate school, and I chose printmaking because ceramics at the time wasn't enough of a mark making thing for me. And so after I got interested in handmade paper because I wasn't interested in, one, making additions, and two, I wasn't that interested in things that were flat. And it's like, so I was like this weird sculptor moving amongst paper and print because I like those tactile materials. Painting was too direct for me. I never had an interest in painting. And then I went out, right after graduate school, I went out and I taught in Somerville. It was a program out in Minturn, Colorado, outside of Vail. And I met, like, you know, Dale Chihuly and Thurman Stanton and Dick Marcus and Edward Delarge, who was working with titanium. And it was like, from being around those people, those materials just became very interesting. So I started doing some installations with titanium because you can color it with electricity. And then I was also doing things with glass in terms of, I was in Hawaii teaching, and I was there during a hurricane, and I thought about how you always tape off glass. So it's been a conceptual interest also, besides just being like those three materials I find interesting together. And they're also, I mean, paper is considered, and glass are considered very fragile, and yet in some respects they're very strong. Like you can make pins out of glass and hammer them, you know, you can hammer the glass, as you know, because you've dealt with some of my work. So, and some reason I sometimes think that's a metaphor for being a woman amongst all of that.
Karen Lee, I wanted to quickly go back to your training as an architect, because I found it interesting because as many of you know, I was trained as an architect as well, and worked for a number of years as an architect. And it's true, this sort of straight line, right, left. But I also see some drawing exercises that we used to do, sort of drawing from, was it drawing from the right side of your brain? Was that ever something that you were familiar with in school or at that
Richard,
time?
I have to tell you, I love this question. A very good friend of mine just gave me that book, and I've looked through it, but it's all about, or largely about, learning how to draw 1 and 2 point perspectives. In architecture school, I could never master either 1 or 2 point perspectives. So I guess maybe my brain just really is better suited to what I'm doing now. That would be, I guess, my best answer to your question. But what I do now is really so free. And I think that that's part of what drawing from the right side of the brain is all about. Forget what you learned, forget what other people's expectations are. Just try to access what your intuition will tell you, what is flowing naturally.
So for both Resa and Karen Lee, I'm curious, we have a question about incorporating other media into your works. Joan talked a little bit about how she works with the three, but Karen Lee, I mean, there's leaves and things in yours. Resa, glitter. So do you want to talk a little bit about those as material?
Yeah, I'm not using the glitter anymore. That was just for that show that we had at the gallery. Mostly I just use paint, and for my installations though, those are mixed media. They are sadly made out of plastics, and laser cut plastics, hand cut plastics, paint, and sometimes glass crystals. Um, but mostly I consider myself a painter who vacillates between 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions. So yeah, I'm not using as many materials as I used to use.
And for me, I still do like making three-dimensional objects from time to time. And in my studio, I have mobiles hanging that actually I made in college, as well as some that I've made recently. What I do like to do though is incorporate all the strands of my canvases into the painting. So for example, when I rip a painting down to size and there are loose threads on the edges, rather than trimming them off, I just kind of put them on the canvas and see whether the paint works as a form of glue. And in one of the paintings in this exhibit, Dive In, you may have noticed there's a human leg kicking up out of the water. I had basically finished that painting, or actually it's up in the air heading down to the water. I'd finished that painting and glanced at my table and saw that there was a long skinny strip of canvas that had been, ripped off of the main piece of canvas to even that out. And I thought, okay, well, this is interesting. I picked it up and I literally like tossed it over the painting and it took the form of a human leg. So it's the same shape of a human leg actually that I've drawn in my whole life. So I kept it standing up, glued it down onto the canvas, and that's the way I'm working with three-dimensionality and extra materials now. I don't really have a need to be as space consuming off the wall as I was in my architecture career, obviously.
So as we wrap up the talk, I like to always end the talk by asking the same question to artists, and forgive me if I already asked this to you all, but what advice would you give to young artists that are starting out?
Well, having taught like many years in university, I think one of the things is you have to follow your own intuition. And I think you have to like not always be in control. I think you have to really, as you're making your work, listen to it and let it talk back to you. I mean, that may sound really odd, but I think that's really important. And also, don't get discouraged and don't let people tell you what to do, because I mean, I had many things where I was told what I did wasn't this or it wasn't that, and I just kept going down my own road.
Risa, do you have a thought?
Well,
Make it smile.
yeah, I'm going to stick with my less than positive. I'll leave the positivity and hopefulness to Karen and Joan. But my advice is always have a backup plan. Having lived as a full-time artist all my life, can be very hellish. So I think it's important to have other skills so that you can pay for following your heart and your dreams. Because if you can't pay for the rent of your studio and your supplies, then it makes making art so much harder. So it's important to have other um, other avenues to make a living.
I think that's good. And Karen Lee?
Well, Richard, I feel like Joan and Risa basically said it all and said it really, really well. But I would just add, do it. Like, don't have voices in your head telling you you can't or you shouldn't or you're not, it's not good enough. If making things is where your heart is, then that's what I would advise people to be doing. I'm not saying that it's easy. I agree having a backup plan is a really important idea. But I feel like the more we trust ourselves, the more other people trust and believe in us and what we have to say and show.
I
I
also
think that,
think that, oh, I'm sorry, Richard.
no, go on.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I also think that, oh God, now I lost my train of thought there for a second. Oh, okay. I lost the thought. It'll come back at some point.
I do ask this question, it's rather selfishly because I do want all artists to encourage the creation of other art because I think that's what makes us move forward and deal with everything that we're dealing with. So with that, we're just at about an hour. I wanted to thank Resa Blatman, Joan Hall, and Karen Lee Sobol. I would like to invite anyone who hasn't seen the show to see it yet. I also would like to remind you and encourage people to collect art because these are things that are meant for people to possess. So with that, thank you all very much and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard.
Bye, Karen. Bye, Joan.
Bye. Oh, and it was really nice to be at an opening with all of us together.
Yes.
And I just say
It
one
was
more thing
very
real
nice.
quickly, is I think you also forgot, Richard, that Making Waves was boarded up during Black Lives Matter.
That's true. Yeah,
So,
I
just-
know it's like what Risa said. I have a sort of lost time from 5 years ago. Again, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.